Ladies, gentlemen, unicorns, and everyone else, welcome to another episode of the Stakin podcast. In today's episode, we had the opportunity to sit down with Eclipse Pad, who are building the first Launchpad for the Cosmos ecosystem. So, welcome, and no surprise here. The very first question I just wanted to ask you is, tell me a little bit more about yourself and your journey so far in crypto, and all of that.
Cool. So I'm Simon, CEO of Eclipse Pad. I've been in the crypto space actually since 2016. So end of 2016, start of 2017. So I've seen a fair bit and the ups and downs. I've been through kind of this bear cycle through 2018, 2019. Actually, funny story. I was actually involved in crypto a lot earlier, but I never stuck around. I was mining Bitcoin on my computer like 2012.
Oh,
Back in the
really?
day. Yeah, I was just kind of someone told me about it, and I played around with it on the computer. I remember the mining pools and things, but I kind of never touched it after that until way later. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, this is cool, but I can't, I was not really making enough money from it to be like, this is exciting. Like you could like hook up your computer to the pools and things, but it wasn't really like, it was like, okay, this is like one of these survey things where you make a little bit of money, but it's not going to be like
Yeah.
world changing, right? But it's kind of interesting now that if you stuck through that like the whole entire time, it would have been insane. So I kind of big hiatus, and then someone that I know was back, brought it up again and was like, you got to check it out again. I was like, I remember this. It's been a long time, and I kind of delved in and went through Binance. And I actually remember using my actual first exposure from the platforms. I had Coinbase, I had Binance, and then I had plus 500 where you could margin. So I was margin trading these assets on plus 500, and I remember making money. And kind of similar to the peak bull run, it's like you do anything, you don't really need to know what you're doing, and you're making money. And I remember going through and building up a fairly decent portfolio, especially for the time. Just buying like things like Tron and seeing it go like 5x, and these ICOs and getting scammed in some of these ICOs. I remember like buying into the Facebook ads they used to run for these ICOs, and I was like hyped and excited, and you buy into these things, and then they were just like full rugs and full scams. So it was like a funny time. And I remember actually I got to February, I think it was start of February, end of January, start of February. And I had like a portfolio. Tron was a big part of my portfolio at the time, and everything had like pushed really hard. And I remember actually like it started dropping, and instead of selling like an idiot at the time, I actually booked a ticket to the Himalayas, and I went to the Himalayas for a whole entire month, right? And I went on a trekking expedition through the Himalayas with my brother, and I literally I was like, okay, I'm going to leave my phone, and when I come back, my portfolio is going to be back up. Absolute stupidity. It was the dumbest thing in the world, right? And I came back and it wasn't higher, and it was an interesting experience. So I kind of like weathered. I actually stuck around through most of 2018, 2019, and I made more stupid mistakes. I was really into Ethos at the time, which went from BQX to Ethos, which later rebranded to Voyager Digital actually. So it got acquired by Voyager Digital, which is interesting. And I purchased some of that on the way down and watched it go from $3 all the way down to like 2.7 cents. Obviously, I sold it before it got that low. But yeah, so I was actually trading. I got stuck into trading on BitMEX and leverage trading and trying to teach myself how to trade, which went disastrous for a little while. But I eventually got the knack of it, and I spent maybe a year at least building up a portfolio slowly. It was like really boring, but it was like a slow build up, and I kind of got to learn a lot more about the space. And then, I was still around. I spent more time on Binance than I was on BitMEX. Stuck around. I still wasn't super involved with DeFi didn't really exist back then. It didn't start till kind of DeFi summer. But I stuck around, and I went through all the ups and downs. And I remember all like the DeFi summer coming through, and I just got deeper and deeper into DeFi. And then and then I actually started getting stuck into my biggest delve into DeFi was actually through Terra. I mean, I'd used different platforms. I'd used ETH, but I was never a big fan of the MetaMask experience. And when Anchor kind of came along, early days of Anchor and Terra, I really delved further into it. I was already doing a lot of it, like educational stuff around crypto and DeFi, but I dug in a lot deeper. I then got involved. A good friend of mine that I actually taught to trade, like maybe a year prior, Simon Rami was like, "Hey, we building this platform on Terra called Loop. Do you want to come and do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to get involved? Either from like a public perspective, like an educational or public perception piece, because I'm really good with people and with education." And then, so I pitched them and I said, "Look, I could build this platform for you guys called Loop Learn." And I had this kind of idea that Coinbase had this awesome like videos, right? These educational videos, but they weren't really following a flow. And I dealt with a lot of new users trying to learn about crypto, but they jump on YouTube, but they get overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. They were getting kind of like all over the shop. And it was actually a very hard experience for new users to learn and get educated about the basics of crypto. So I was like, look, let's build this platform. I'll build it. This is what we kind of got to like think about. Let's build like a flow, a beginning flow of videos, and this will act as like a lead magnet into an ecosystem of products, and a great kind of exposure tool. And then pitched TFL, who actually ended up funding the videos themselves. And they were fairly expensive videos. I was going to do it all with like a camera and just speaking to the camera originally. But then, there was obviously this funding from TFL. It's like, let's do these really high quality animated videos. Let's do a full flow, and then let's do educational videos for the entire ecosystem. And obviously, because they were like printing money at the time, they had a ton of money. It kind of made sense. It's quite a very cash intensive thing to do. But I got stuck in and I built out 36 videos, and we're working on a ton more. There was like talking with Mars and talking with all these different platforms we're building education videos for. And the idea was that users would come in, learn about DeFi, learn about crypto very, very basically, and then they'd have quests and actions that they could perform. And then they would kind of get onboarded into crypto and DeFi in a simple way where they've actually played already with the platforms. And there was a few kind of hurdles to get through it and learn and everything. And we never actually got to that stage. Terra kind of collapsed before I could kind of get to that stage. And then when we hit bear market, Loop Learn, like the learning product became a lot harder to do because the funding required to continue something of this scale is very difficult. Because like you think about these videos were like 15 grand a video originally. And so it was like, hey, okay, we built this flow of videos. What do we need to finish it? But can you go from like really high quality videos to then not high quality videos? How do you kind of continue it? So it was very difficult for me to kind of like process. And I knew that retail wasn't as interested at the time. And so, yeah, it was a difficult one because it's still like a big passion of mine, education. I think it's really important. But just like how you tackle that is definitely important. But something else kind of happened around that same time. I was kind of getting involved in different parts of Loop because I was really like thinking of like, I really want this to succeed. I want to push it. I'm focused on Learn, but I'm going to kind of get involved in the different pieces and just try, at least from like AMAs and, business development. I had a lot of relationship with a lot of like VCs and different people. And I was, really trying to push it forward and do as much as I could to really like get it to take off. And I got brought on as an advisor for a platform called Launchpad that was getting incubated by Loop, but it was a bit of an interesting kind of relationship where it was a separate platform, but it was incubated by Loop, and it wasn't being actively like super managed and things like that. I got brought on as an advisor, and I went, hey, this has got potential, but we got to do this. So I really dug in and I really smashed the marketing and kind of got it moving. And then when Terra collapsed, I kind of like, it was like, okay, Terra collapsed. And then there was an opportunity to reinvent it, right? Because I hadn't been involved from the start. And I was looking at this and I went, these models worked really well in the bull market. They don't necessarily work in the bear. The guy that was kind of running it kind of vanished. He kind of went internal and disappeared. I think, got hit really hard by Terra and just disheartened and just kind of vanished. And I was like, look, and I went with the guys like, look, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to take over this platform and I'm going to separate it more from Loop, right? It's an incubated project, but I'm going to rebrand it. I'm going to reimagine the model. I'm going to give it its own vision and I'm going to, go and build it into its own platform, right? It got brought over with Loop to Juno. So as well as like lots of other kind of dApps that we're friends with, like very good friends with like the Nirvana guys. I helped to bring those guys over as well as, others. And I rebranded Lunar Launcher to Eclipse Pad. And I spent a fair bit of time actually thinking around through this model of like how can you actually reinvent this? Because, Launchpads are really good in bull markets, most of them. But when you get into the bear, it becomes a lot more difficult when less projects are launching. There's less kind of excitement around launches. There's less retail users. So it requires a new model and a new touch. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that and focusing on that. And it, definitely haven't been the hardest. It hasn't been the easiest thing in the world. But
No,
there's
definitely.
some cool vision there. But I'll stop rambling because I'm sure you've got
Oh,
other
no, no
questions to ask.
worries.
But
Well,
that
you're
gives
kind
you
of
a bit of like
answering.
a scope of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but you're kind of already answering a couple other questions, so I was like, yeah, just go ahead. No, but definitely. Hey, so before going into more of the techie side, I think, obviously we are also quite big on education, so we try to make all our videos and everything quite low, like the boundary of entry quite low. So before we go
Yeah,
and continue with everything, can you just quickly explain, in your view, what a launchpad really is, like in its essence and what it does?
yeah, for sure. And I'll start with maybe like a high level concept of what it
Yeah.
should be as opposed to what it necessarily is. Because launchpads, I think, especially decentralized launchpads, have built sometimes bad relationships in certain, not all of them, but some of them. And I think it's to do with like them being a byproduct of the bull market. They really kind of, especially like if you look at Binance, like Binance Chain, BNB Chain, and kind of the launchpads that birthed out of there, were really launching really crappy products, right? Like really crappy projects. And it was like almost like this retail excitement of I want to 100x my bag and get into these projects. And then, the launch pads would just launch like crappy gaming projects or really like average projects
Mm.
and with really low kind of valuations, low floats. These things would go 100x, they'd promote it, advertise it, and more users would come in. And it was just this Ponzi pump and dump kind of cycle of crap projects. Then on the other side of the fence, you have, kind of the I would call them incumbents, the current incumbent, like the coin lists and the IEO launch pads and the ICO launch, like the like sort of bigger ones that launch chains, launch bigger projects. They have like big backing. They have like they raise $50 million. They raise large amounts. So a launch pad, if you break it down into its essence, is more than just a raising platform and a platform to bootstrap liquidity. It's also a marketing platform, right? So it's like, how can you bootstrap community users? How can a project gain exposure on their launch, gain new users, investors, users in their project? How can they also raise capital from the public in the process? Or bootstrap liquidity, as you like, depending on kind of the goals. And an ICO typically raises large amounts of capital. An IDO launchpad is more about like bootstrapping their liquidity on launch. But it's more than just that. It's really about like getting exposure and broader exposure, right? So it acts as kind of a matchmaker platform between projects and investors, typically retail investors, but
Mhm.
there's different types. In which like, hey, we're going to like launch this good product. We're going to launch this, this vetted project. And the investors are like, hey, cool, this is, where do I put my money? I want to kind of find the next opportunities and I kind of want to get involved. This is a place that I can go and do it. The problem is a lot of launchpads didn't actually vet their project properly. And you ended up with these like really crappy projects that are, or many of them aren't worth anything. So that's the overview of a launchpad. What it's meant to be: a marketing platform that's meant to bootstrap community, as well as helping projects to raise capital and investors, giving them like a place in which they can invest in projects early. Kind of get into like a pre-sale seed, like a raise round. Obviously not as
Mhm.
low as seed or private, but before it goes onto the market.
All right, sounds clear to me. Hey, and you were saying, sometimes it's not vetted properly for Eclipse. How do you guys like go about all of that?
Yeah, so it's also to do with positioning, right? Like we're
Yeah.
I'm really being like looking at how to bridge the gap between that ICO gap and the IDO gap. So instead of being like a Binance chain like Launchpad, how can you
Hmm.
really be someone who's launching high quality projects that's kind of focused on maybe on some bigger raises, that's got bigger backing, bigger community, and actually closes that bridge as opposed to being just a Launchpad on one chain that just launches the first thing that comes through the door, right? So some of the really important pieces, it's not just about the vetting, it's also about like how you acquire deal flow. So a chain that doesn't have access to much deal flow typically is going to take anything that comes through the door, especially when there's the community. And you're seeing this on a couple of chains, even in Cosmos, right? Even though they're not launch pads, the community is like, oh, we want more projects. We want things launching. They want things kind of happening because they're bored or
Yeah.
the price is going down or whatever. So it's the same kind of behavior that happens in some of these launch pads where if they're not launching anything, the community's like, let's launch something. We want something to happen and this stuff. So they just kind of take the next the projects that are launching maybe in the lower market maybe are just not they can't afford to wait as long, for example, or things like that. For us at Eclipse, like really my big focus on vetting is obviously having like a baseline filter obviously within the team as kind of a first touch point.
Yeah.
and then bringing in external due diligence. So I'm in touch with a couple of really good due diligence guys that do like deep investment reports. So the idea around that is to do like an investment report and then obviously publish like a shorter version to the public so people can actually see what's going into that. The future plans for that is also to set up like a DAO council later on to vote on like a final decision. So it's like, okay, we've done the internal filtering, we've had the due diligence, and then the DAO council takes that information and just does like a kind of like a high level vote. Eventually, we want to bring in community governance, but we didn't want to get bottlenecked by that in terms of like the process of projects. If there isn't enough participation, that can cause conflicts as well. So our vision is eventually to kind of have community governance and setting up the right way. But yeah, vetting is really important. But what's more important than just vetting is deal flow, because if you get good deal flow, then you can be more picky with the projects you bring through. So that comes down to business development, relationships with different chains, ecosystem, like getting close to kind of foundations, accelerators, incubators, and that's all stuff that we've been doing behind the scenes, which is like, it's a lot of work, I tell you, but
Yeah.
it's the required work. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds extremely intense, but also very cool. And, I think, yeah, it's what's making this Launchpad stand out from so many others that are trying or, just coming through. Hey, and so when, obviously, when you guys were looking into migrating from Terra after everything that happened to another Cosmos chain, so my first question with that is why stay in the Cosmos ecosystem? Like, what makes it so attractive for you? And then why did you eventually
Mm.
decided to go with Juno?
Well, interesting enough, and like I actually helped to I helped to push this over the line, which um, is interesting because for me, what was happening in Terra, right, is it was fairly difficult in Terra as a DApp on the Terra ecosystem. Like imagine you're building like a decentralized application. The community and stuff
Yeah.
was great on Terra, but Luna had so much value capture that like literally standing out within that ecosystem where your token appreciation was like really, really, really hard, right? It was hard to gain like traction because everybody would always sell everything for Luna, right? Like you would actually like sell, every out for Luna. It kind of changed more towards the end, but it was really hard. And there was a little bit of like a cartel going on as well, which typically happens in most ecosystems. So it was really kind of hard to break through that. And was trying to kind of stay ahead of what would be differentiated, what would kind of like change things up. And actually, Terra upgraded to IBC, so they opened up the IBC bridge, and nobody used it. Like it was used the other way, but there was really no one coming in over into Cosmos and using the Cosmos unless they set up Terra Station. But it was like minimal, right? I was talking to a lot of Cosmos
Yeah.
people that wanted to use like Terra, but they weren't. It wasn't easy. And I was like, look, this could give us an edge. So let's actually list the first IBC pairs on Terra. So I was talking to the guys. I'm like, let's do it. Let's list Osmo. Let's list Secret. Let's list Atom. And so Luke was actually the first to list these IBC pairs, these Cosmos IBC pairs, and to actually start using the IBC bridge. Didn't go as well as I thought it would. I was really excited about it. A lot of people were interested in coming over, but there wasn't Kepler integration. So that caused issues, right? Because there isn't Kepler integration, then users were like, well, we're not going to set up a separate wallet. But what I was seeing at Cosmos at the time was Osmo was pumping, was seeing like NFT space, Stargaze was going off with these NFTs, and the volume was even higher across Stargaze and many of these chains than it was in what I was seeing in the DApp ecosystem Cosmos in Terra. So I was like, look, we should be getting closer to the Cosmos. Let's start kind of getting more involved in the Cosmos, not Terra as well, but like doing both. And I started delving into like the concept of like app chain thesis and this new proposition of scalability and chains, and I was really interested and excited. I saw the potential, even though it was new and fresh, and there wasn't a huge amount of there wasn't a massive amount of development happening, at least in wider Cosmos. And I went, hey, cool, this is awesome. Let's start kind of building more relationships. So I set out and started to actually build relationships in the Cosmos. I got really close to the Passage guys, built really good friendship with Arel and Lex, which was some of my my earlier kind of connections. Did some spaces with them. We started connecting with Cosmos Host and a lot of started getting deeper and actually kind of getting involved in a lot of these communities. And when Terra collapsed, what happened was there was a bit of a free for all for projects on Terra, right? Like literally, like you could have seen this as a Shark Tank. Like there were chains everywhere, like wanting to bring these. It was an ASAP thing. Like all these chains. I mean, like the Loop team was having calls with like Partisia and Hedera and Polygon and Near, and all these chains were like trying to do everything possible to capture this land grab of Terra projects that were like moving from Terra. It was literally crazy. Like I've never seen anything like it. Like even within the Cosmos, there was Osmos and Secret, and everyone was just like wanting a piece of the pie. They wanted Terra projects. But the loudest of all and the most interactive community that was involved in this was actually the Juno community.
Yeah.
And we put up polls on Twitter, and on the loop Twitter, I remember getting 7,000. There was 7,000 votes on a poll to like about which chain should move, and it was like 68% Juno. So there was this massive like influx from the Juno community around wanting to bring on these Terra projects, and they were like, out of all the ecosystems, like it was, there was so many. It was actually a period of time where I was like trying to push decision making because the team was a bit demoralized, and I was like, guys, like I was like to Tom, we need to make a decision. Like you need to make a decision. You need to like actually have some certainty, and they were all weighing up the options of every. Like it was just like a kid in a candy store of all the options of different chains that we're kind of wanting to bring over. And I went, I was like, look, these guys obviously have a really strong community, and they're like really active, and they're kind of similar. They felt like they kind of had similar values in many ways, and I was kind of like pushing that. And so, there was these grant talks in the TDF like grant program, and I was talking with Kevin a lot, and I wasn't kind of involved in the decision making, but I was kind of playing puppet behind the scenes, just trying to get it moving faster. We're trying to get it moving because obviously the Juno community wanted us, and everybody wanted us. But then it was just kind of like, oh, where do we go? Because we've got like all these options and things like that. So that was interesting. And then there was kind of like what followed from that is a lot of Terra projects actually came over and followed Loop because there was a little bit of uncertainty. And at a time of uncertainty, projects wanted to go to where there was kind of like decision making happening. And some of the bigger players and the kind of leaders in the Terra space still hadn't made the decision. They were still sitting on the fence, figuring out whether they wanted to stay on Terra 2 or what they were doing. So when Loop kind of announced that move, a lot of projects followed over and came over to Juno. Had a chat to as well. Like I was talking to Jacob in Austin about like Levana, and they set up a chat with the guys, and then Levana came over to Juno, and yeah, that's kind of how it all happened. And I saw a lot of vision for Cosmos, not just within Juno, but like as a multi-chain kind of view of the whole of Cosmos. But then I think the bear market kind of hit and things just got more difficult. I think as well. I think developing on Juno was harder than expected as well in a few ways. I thought personally that it was going to be like a copy paste from Cosmosm straight over to Juno, but it wasn't as straightforward as that. And even within the Launchpad, I thought, okay, it's easy. It's Cosmosm. We can like move Terra code over to Juno. It's all going to be the same, but then you got to think about the fact it was a different version of Cosmosm. I'm not a dev myself either, but then there was like all sorts of infrastructure that hadn't matured necessarily on Juno that needed to be built out. And so there was definitely challenges there for sure, and it wasn't the smoothest sailing, and the bear market didn't help that whatsoever. But yeah, that gives you a bit of like a kind of a nostalgia of that kind of period of time, which was crazy.
Yeah. Well, you made it through, right? So that's amazing. I mean, it sounds insane. And I guess, bear markets, all you can do is build. So you had the right timing, I guess, to like hunker down and continue on building.
Yeah, it's building and it's adapting. And I've found this a bit with Eclipse. It's like there's a few things that need to happen. Like you need to generate runway, you need to extend runway, and you need to position so that you're in a place to do well, at least in the bear, or at least survive or capture some land share during these markets. So I think as an entrepreneur, it's about like making pivots and shifts and adapting and doing what you can to kind of position yourself well so that when the market does change again, you're in a good position. And that's one of the hardest things to do. I tell you, even the last month or so, I've been investigating a lot of stuff with Axelar and a lot of things with Eclipse of how we can position stronger, because things that work in a bull market don't work in a bear market. You can't just be and I mean, a lot of chains are going to die. A lot of apps are going to die, and people don't realize that. But unless you're defensible and different, and you're able to capture enough market share, you don't stand out like during the bear markets, and you can run out of runway. Your community can be pissed off and bury you. So it's definitely a challenging time, and I've seen it happen through 2018, 2019. So I know exactly how it goes, and I've seen great projects where their communities turn against them, and they've bounced back. Some of them have bounced back, some of them have died, and many projects that we see now aren't going to survive this market, and that's something to kind of consider. But adapting is the strength. Is like as an entrepreneur, if you're able to kind of pivot, adapt, not too much. Like you don't want to be pivoting every 2 minutes and like no one can tell what you're doing, but pivoting enough to go, what's the research? What does the market need? What's like defensible in terms of like, what is something that's an unfair advantage that's not another DEX or another NFT marketplace, something that's not replicatable and something that's almost intangible, if you like, right? What's maybe a first mover advantage or something that's like either so innovative that no one can copy it, or that you have like advantages like a strong business development or relationships or something that can't be replicated. And it's hard, like being an entrepreneur in this market. Like I've got sympathy for every single builder, because if you're not building a platform in this market and you know the pains of what it is, I challenge you to try it, because it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy out there, but also for me, like and I think probably for you as well, like we've seen it go up and down for multiple years. So, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. We just all have to make it through.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, and so currently on Juno, we have the open source discussion. I was really curious to hear a little bit about that from you. Like, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Look, I actually recently think I've shifted more of my thoughts around this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was originally I was close to it, at least from initial stages, because I believe in competitive advantages. But then, so my concept of it is, I think I still believe in a timeline for open sourcing, not for every project, but for especially certain innovative early stage technologies. So if you like build a specific thing, and for example, you're even like a dev on Juno that builds something really innovative, right? And they don't necessarily have the connections, or they don't have yet the kind of ability to kind of move that forward. I believe it can be problematic sometimes if you have a bigger player that's established, that's literally able to take that code and implement it and then follow through. This
Yeah.
is where the importance of not just code, like your code can't be the only thing that differentiates you. You need to be able to be defensible. But I think in the early stages of projects, sometimes it's difficult. If you're a small team, you don't have a huge amount of reach, you're building something really cool and innovative, you can get crushed by existing market players, especially in a bear market, where what happens is usually the power consolidates. Like you'll see it right now, a lot of it will consolidate more to osmosis, for example, because like obviously it's just the way those markets work. So I do believe in timelines for open sourcing. I do believe in the importance of open sourcing. I think for money Legos, we need it. I think we need to be able to, like, users need to be able to innovate on existing tech. There needs to be kind of people improving stuff. We need to have like the anchors where people can take them and build on top of them and create stuff. So I'm a huge proponent of open source, not just from like a security perspective. I mean, security, you can get audits done, but I do believe in some level of early stage defensibility as well, especially if you don't have the market advantages. Because as long, at least until you're building that, right? Because if you just develop a platform and then you're expected to open source from day one while you're building it, and then suddenly you
Yeah.
don't even really have time to gain some market traction, to gain penetration, to figure out what your product market fit is, to figure out what your defensibility is. And you can get like, I mean, and I know, obviously there's this whole thing about like, here to build and to improve finance, but sometimes you may have an innovative idea, but you can't even get there because you're out of the game before you even get there. So I think there is some controversy around it. I
Yeah.
do have that opinion that I think it's important. And you see this in business. Like I know guys building cool ideas that don't share decks with everyone just yet, because they're like, okay, we haven't built out the defensibility of this idea yet. If I bring this to market, likely an established player can just take that, copy it, build it, and then you never have a chance to penetrate the market. So yeah, it's this funny conundrum.
Yeah. It's like a fine line between guarding your own ideas, especially if they're really innovative, and like sharing everything with the world. But so I guess we could conclude it has to be somewhere along the lines of like, okay, it has to be open source eventually, but maybe not in the initial stages of a project.
I don't think everything needs to be open source, but I
Yeah.
do agree with like the public grants funding around that being open source at least.
Mm-hmm.
I think things are better open source. I wouldn't go after platforms that choose to be closed source, for example. That's their choice. If they have community members that are using it and they have good teams, they've got audits,
Yeah.
that's up to them. Obviously, it's preferential for them to be open source and for people to innovate on top of that tech. But if they're guarding like a competitive like advantage for a period of time, I think that's fine. But I do agree with the concept that for grants, open sourcing should be a requirement, at least a timeline for open sourcing, because that should become kind of public goods, if it's getting funded by a community and a chain, that should then become like usable in terms of improving the entire experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. All right. Well, sounds good. Hey, and 2023 is almost upon us. Can you tell me a little bit about your dreams and goals for 2023?
Survive. No, I'm kidding.
Keep
Um,
breathing.
I've got to keep breathing. Yeah, like at this stage, like, yeah, man, it gets crazy, and you kind of like
Yeah.
put a step in front of the other. But I'm really excited. Look, I, I'm I like to tell people I'm kind of in this kind of two camps of like joy and pain at the same time, joy and frustration, because I have so much like ambition and view of like the importance of bear markets and how you can really like separate from competitors. I saw a quote that was like, you may not be able to overtake cars when it's sunny, but you can overtake it when it's raining, right? So I see the opportunity of bear markets. I've been through it. I know the kind of, if you do the right thing and you put yourself in the right positions, you can have some insane opportunities and really create some cool stuff within this market and penetrate and get some traction. But then there's the frustrations of like, you want to get this penetration and traction, but you have to find the right pivots and the right angles and stuff to get there, as well as building in a bear market, dealing with fundraising, funding, all the chaos, the drama, the FUD, the everything that comes with bear markets in general. So it's this double-edged sword of, for me, next year, I'm really excited to drive Eclipse Pad forward. It's going to go through a couple pivots for sure. My the stuff I'm really focusing on at the moment has actually been working out how to build out a full multi-chain platform that abstracts away the UX. Because as I mentioned earlier in the call, there's this big gap between IDO platforms and ICO platforms like CoinList. So to
Hmm.
bridge this gap, right, you need to be able to have seamless UX participation, which at the moment is a massive incumbent. There is these multi-chain platforms, um, but the problem is users are having to change chains, change networks. If I do an IDO launch, for example, on a Binance chain, then it has to be like, I have to have Binance chain wallet, or I need to have, MetaMask for Binance chain, or I have to participate on that chain. And then when
Yeah.
the token's launched, it's launched on the DEX on Binance chain, and you have to bridge between. It's actually a complete nightmare, right? And no one's really solved for this experience, this multi-chain experience, where you can kind of have this, imagine being able to participate with any wallet from any chain, right? Or not really needing to know what chain you're on, and participating in a launch across 10 different chains, maybe even the token swapping between 10 chains right on launch. That's how I believe that we bridge DeFi closer to this centralized finance experience. But no one's really handled it. And I've talked to like many, many wallet providers, and almost none have really been tackling this at all. And so, it's kind of been on a mission to figure out how we can kind of do this. Be taking a lot to Axi guys with general message passing, where you can sign transactions onto, I could actually be on, this chain signing transactions on another chain that potentially can bridge that gap closer. But the issue still comes with wallets. So I've spent a bit of time working out how we can pivot to that and create an experience where a user comes on, he can participate from any wallet, any chain. Our initial kind of thoughts are using Squid, good friends like Fig. And yeah, so that's kind of the vision that I'm kind of looking to go. Obviously, it's about having an MVP. So it's like rolling out
Yeah.
Eclipse Pad when the right time to launch. I know a lot of questions in the community have been like, when's it launching? Like, why not launch it now? All this sort of stuff. And I'm sure that's one of your questions. The difficult
Mm.
thing with a Launchpad, right, is there's a few things. Firstly, it needs to have really good quality projects to launch. And if there's nothing launching right now, it's a bit hard to launch a Launchpad when there's very little things launching, right? Because you just
Yeah.
launch a token and then people are like, oh, well, there's nothing launching. So what's the point of this, right? And secondly, like your first few launches are super important, because Pad's actually, I would say, probably one of the hardest platforms to build, because tech is only a piece of it. Like it's such a heavy relationship, BD, reputational piece. If you list your first few projects and they don't sell out, or you don't get traction, or you don't have that, then you're pretty much cooked. Like the reputation's gone for the pad, and it's very, very hard to gain back. So it's an extremely difficult platform to build, especially in a bear market, and to do well. And there's
Mm.
actually very few launch pads currently launching anything in entire crypto. So it gives you like kind of an idea of the sentiment in the space right now, which makes it a very hard platform to just go, hey, I'm going to launch it tomorrow, and just hope that it does well. Instead, it's about being really strategic with it and being like, hey, do we want a platform that's going to be long lasting and actually a quality project? Or do we want to launch something early for the sake of launching something and having something and have it fail and not be able to regain? So I'm very, very conscious of that. And I know it's hard for people, especially those that haven't dealt with launch pads. I think the Cosmos is still going to be a great place during the bear market, because there's so many chains launching and I'm talking to a lot of them. But many
Yeah.
of them aren't looking till January, February, even Q2 to launch, because the market conditions are so poor right now. It doesn't make sense. So it's about like understanding that, and we're going to keep focusing on building the community, building that up, and timing the launches. We're actually going to launch platforms with our own token, but just being very smart, strategic with the kind of projects that we launch, getting good deal flow in, and also like not rushing it for the sake of rushing it, but doing it right. So it's not, we don't have just a failed platform that was great, could have been great, but isn't great because it tried to launch too quickly.
Yeah, it's not like with traditional or like more other projects where it's like, well, okay, well, the tech needs to be there and it needs to be ready so we can launch. Has a lot more to do with just finding the perfect moment, if it exists, at all.
There's
But
no perfect moment. There's no perfect moment, right? There's no perfect moment.
yeah.
I mean, the tech's pretty good. Like the tech's good. There's still a lot
Mhm.
of work I have to do on the community and the build up side. I'm still not confident in launching a project tomorrow, for example, and having like, okay, it's going to sell out 100K or 200K. I'm watching some of these NFT launches, and I'm looking at like how bad they're performing, and it's that's not a direct reflection, but it's an important reflection around like the appetite for people and risk, right?
Yeah.
So that's one piece. And the tech's done. Like I'm still improving the tech. There's still tons that is being improved and done. But like if we wanted to launch tomorrow, we could launch tomorrow. But it's not like a DEX that you can launch and then kind of like build up over time. It has to be done right. And it's a very hard platform to build. And so it's just what I keep trying to educate and try to put forward, that like I get this pressure. You want to have the platforms that have said they're going to launch for a while launch. But and it's not just about perfect timing, it's about picking not the worst timing possible, which is right
Yeah.
now. Like the last right now is actually the worst after FTX, especially. Like,
Mhm.
it's the worst possible timing to launch. And I don't see anyone in their right mind looking to launch pre-January at least.
No, I don't
Um,
think so.
well, they shouldn't, at least if they like. I would recommend not to, but that's every project makes their own choices. And but yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. But yeah,
All right. Well, I mean, I'm still excited. I mean, I know a lot of people are. You've been doing an amazing job with the ecosystem and building it up. So we'll just all have to be patient, and it will be fine.
keep an eye out because there's some exciting announcements over the next couple weeks.
Yeah.
Especially around, we're going to be integrating more chains, which is going to be really key to deal flow. So obviously
Hmm.
tapping in, we want to. One thing that I've noticed, especially with chains, like I talked to a few chains that are interested in launching, but they're a little bit more difficult because of their nature. They need to rely on osmosis for liquidity. So some of these chains tend to go to the LBPs more, not
Hmm.
necessarily as a method of launching, but because everybody's trying to get into osmosis. So that's a little bit harder with the chains, and it's going to take a bit longer to kind of build up. So either we can launch liquidity directly on osmosis, which will be just like an extra option. But my main focus right now, I think, is finding really high quality DApps on top of chains as well.
Hmm.
We will be launching chains in the future for sure. But looking at like what are some really high quality DApps that are valued well, that have good teams on top of ecosystems that are building, and we can do those launches. And when you tap into the different ecosystems, you also absorb some of that community as well, right? And so by doing that, we can kind of like spread out that community, grow out the base of users, so that when there is one launch, it gets more traction. And that's kind of what we're looking to do: is how can you gain more exposure, more traction, starting within Cosmos and then expanding outside of Cosmos in terms of capturing users into the Cosmos. Like getting people excited about what's being built on top of Cosmos. That's really the kind of the vision for Cosmos, at least, and the ability to kind of bring users into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a while to go.
Well, ambitious, that's for sure. But I mean, amazing as well. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if
It
I
sounds
don't burn
tricky,
out first.
but
If I don't burn out first, we'll be good. I think we'll be okay. Oh
if you
god,
don't go crazy, it should be fine. All right. All right.
I'm
That
already
makes sense.
crazy. Look, building in DeFi in the bear market drives you crazy as it is. Like you got to
Yeah.
be absolutely bonkers to do this, in my mind. But yeah, it's part of the fun.
Exactly. All right, awesome. Hey, that was it for me for questions. I know that you'll be sitting down, or your team will be sitting down with Robert to do the Twitter Spaces as well.
It'll
But
be
I don't
fun.
know if there's anything else that you would like to share. Any thoughts? Now's your time. Doo-doo-doo.
On the spot. No, look, I'm just looking to build good relationships. Like that's
Yeah.
really it. Like right now, I mean, even with yourselves, validators, projects, VCs. I do this a lot behind the scenes. People don't actually see how much. I'm always behind the scenes doing introductions, right? It's like projects to VCs, VCs to projects, projects to projects, and just building this web of introductions and network behind the scenes, which is a really important piece of this launchpad. There's a lot of networking that goes into building one of these things because
Mm.
it's all relationship business. So it's just keeping on like validators, for example, are going to be really important, building relationships with like really good validators, because, when we get chains coming through, we can help with things like, setting up validators and marketing exposure and everything. So that's obviously an important piece of that, right? Projects, obviously not just for launching, but also to create co-marketing, tapping into spaces, chains that need to have like projects on their chains launched that are quality. So it's just like a constant relationship building business, of like absorbing like influencers. KOLs are an important piece of this as well. We need them, love or hate them, we still need them in this experience because they're part of the marketing experience. The way you do it is important, and I think many pads didn't do it well and they got really, really shilly. But yeah, that's an important piece. Like right now I'm reaching out to a lot of KOLs, building out a KOL and influencer network, which is important because they're part of, again, their marketing experience. But you can put terms and stuff. Like I know we had like a rampage recently around like influence that had created really shit content, or not really disclosing what they were doing. So I think for us, when we build up this KOL and influencer stuff, it's going to be about disclosures, really having tight parameters on the kind of content that you create. So it's not like, oh, price go up. Oh, that's not, doesn't help anyone, right? It just creates the wrong community. It's just not the right people. So yeah, but I'm excited. I'm excited to do more stuff with you guys. I'm excited to bring this to the world and tap into the cosmos more, and to educate more people on what we can create and co-create, right? Like I know I can't do it by myself, and we've got a good team, but it's not something I could do by myself. I could paint the vision, but like the more hands on deck, the better, and the more support we get, the better. So yeah, definitely looking to expand this and create something really cool.
Awesome. Hey, and so if anyone wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
So we've got Telegram. Telegram's probably one of the most active at responding. Twitter and Telegram are some good places. If you want like more private DMs, Twitter's good. Telegram, we've got the Telegram channel. Discord's good. I'm not as active on Discord because it like drives my ADHD crazy. But we have some really cool guys from the community that have been helping out a ton on that. So definitely a cool place to like check things out. I've always post Medium articles and stuff on Twitter and Telegram and stuff. So definitely check out the channel. Some good stuff.